Welcome to Tardisian Files. Hello listeners! So, feeding directly on from our previous review of Space Babies, in this episode we're going to be reviewing The Devil's Chord, with Jinx Monsoon as the villainous maestro. The episode starts in 1925. Coincidentally, the same year that the toy maker began orchestrating the events of the Giggle. We see a piano tutor, Timothy Drake, is teaching his pupil, Henry Arbinger, to play the piano, when he plays the centuries-old Devil's Chord, summoning the mystical maestro through the piano. The maestro reveals himself to be Henry's daddy, and Henry himself is a harbinger. The maestro proceeds to kill Timothy by feasting on all of the quote-unquote music in his heart. Jumping forward a few decades, the Doctor and Ruby arrive in London 1963, all dressed up to see the Beatles record at Abbey Road Studios. To their shock, however, they find the Beatles and every other studio artist's songs are absolute soulless rubbish. After speaking to John Lennon and Paul McCartney, the Doctor and Ruby find out there's no music left in the world. Up on the roof of the studio, they find that London is overcast by this unearthly, unnatural fog. The Doctor gets Ruby a piano on the roof of the studio and gets her to play a song she wrote for her friend after a bad breakup. While the song brings momentary joy to people on the streets who hear it, it also summons the maestro. The Doctor and Ruby hide, with the Doctor using the sonic to create a silent shield, preventing the maestro from finding them. The Doctor then takes Ruby back to 2024, where they see a ruined London, with an implied nuclear winter. The Doctor explains that if they don't restore music to the world in 1963, humanity will resort to war without any other outlet, and wipe themselves out. The maestro, having followed them from 1963, confronts them, confirming themselves to be the one of the toy maker's legions, specifically his child. As the maestro can only be banished by the right combination of notes, the Doctor and Ruby escape the maestro and head back to 1963, heading back to the studio, intending to find the right notes and record them on the sonic. Before the Doctor can find the right chord, however, the maestro arrives and kidnaps Ruby to another recording suite. The Doctor runs after them and confronts Maestro, who proceeds to try and drain Ruby of her inner music, only to be shocked and rattled by what they find. The Carol of the Bells. The same music playing the night Ruby was born. The Maestro feels the song's power, saying it's just like his, the one who waits. And he was there the night Ruby was born. Taking the Maestro's shakiness as an opening to challenge them, the Doctor and Ruby try and find the banishment chord in a music battle. But they fail. The Maestro proceeds to trap them inside musical instruments. However, just as they're in the process of being trapped, John Lennon and Paul McCartney arrive in time and find the right chord on the discarded piano outside the recording suite, and they unknowingly banish the Maestro. With the Maestro gone, the musicless timeline is negated, and the studio bursts out into song and dance, providing for a visually fun ending to the episode. Starting with the prose of the episode, we get another clue into Ruby's origins in this episode. the one who waits was there on the night of Ruby's birth, and they may very well have been the hooded figure in the Doctor's vision from the previous episode. Additionally, we got a nice reference to the show's origins, with the Doctor referencing Susan in 1963. I really loved the alternate 2024 scene as well, as it was a nice reminder of previous episodes where the Doctor would show his companions the outcome if they didn't stop the big bad. Just like in the Pyramids of Mars, when the Fourth Doctor took Sarah Jane forward in time to show her what would happen to Earth if they didn't stop Sutekh in 1911. I also did love the musical moments in this episode, however few there may have been, and the ending in particular was a lot of fun to watch, and it looked like it was a lot of fun for the actors to film as well. So you could see there was a lot of genuine joy and excitement in this filming section, and I really enjoyed that. I also loved the introduction to Henry Arbinger and the role he played in the episode, a Harbinger who was conveniently seen sneaking away during the ending montage, so I have a feeling he's going to be a Harbinger not just for one godlike being, but several godlike beings in the Toymaker's legions. Above all, I really loved the Maestro. They were fun, they were theatrical, a little bit camp, very comedic, while still being an extremely threatening villain. They also firmly joined the list of aliens who had the Doctor well and truly beaten, giving us a very ominous look at what the Doctor will be up against when he faces the rest of the Toymaker's legions. In particular, I really loved the moment in the episode where the Doctor and Ruby were trying to find the banishment chord in the first studio suite, and the Doctor can't hear the background music, which Ruby can. And the way they transitioned into it whilst producing the episode was amazing, because of course we could hear the background music, but the Doctor couldn't. And it really broke the fourth wall when we actually saw the Maestro using that music against Ruby. And the fact that it took her a moment to realise it as well, and the fact that the audience realised the same time Ruby did, I think was a really good plot device to use for the episode. Like, it really helped to portray the Maestro's power over music in this episode, and also added to making them more threatening. Additionally, we learn a lot more about Ruby's character, in this case, her musical passion. And her childhood love of music, and the Beatles specifically, was inspired by her mother Carla's ex-girlfriend. We also see a vulnerable side to the Doctor in this episode. He's genuinely afraid of the Toymaker's legions and scared for his life. Rightly so, because he very nearly didn't make it out of this encounter alive. And additionally, in this episode, the plot really states the importance of music, showing just how important it has been throughout history and what the world would look like without it. And I genuinely think that the writers were onto something, because if there hadn't been this musical revolution in the 1940s through to the 60s, then perhaps humanity genuinely would have gone to war, because music is a really important emotional outlet, and it has the ability to influence massive groups of people. A case in point being in the 1940s, how music was used to keep morale up for the Allied forces, even in some of the darkest days of the war. Music's important, and the episode really stated that very well. However, unlike the first episode, I did have a few cons for this episode, certainly a few more than I did for Space Babies. The first and most obvious con of this episode is that, for an episode that promised to be a musical episode with the Beatles, the episode doesn't really have many musical moments and doesn't feature the Beatles very heavily. To be honest, I thought the inclusion of the Beatles was a bit unnecessary, because the fact that an unknown composer, completely fictional for the episode, was the one who summoned the Maestro, shows that the Doctor, Ruby, or any side character could have successfully banished the Maestro and saved the day. It didn't really seem worth the mere 10 minutes of broken up cameos of the Beatles lookalikes in the episode to have really included. Also, the 4 decades between Maestro's rise and fall were left unaddressed in the episode. Did the Maestro's defeat free up all of the music back to its proper time and place, like the defeat of the Toymaker returned Charles Banerjee to 1925, Or is the timeline permanently altered with 40 years worth of music missing? And less a con per se, but given how Maestro was released before World War II and the massive influence music had on morale for the Allied forces in the 1940s, I personally would have set this episode in the 1940s rather than the 60s to see what the impact on the war effort that the Maestro would have had. Overall, I thought that the episode has a very strong villain and follows on perfectly from the last episode in terms of developing Ruby's mystery further. We see a vulnerable side to the Doctor, and above all, the power of music and how it is integral to human society and how important it has been throughout history was very well stated in the writing of the episode. The inclusion of the Beatles was unrequired, in my opinion, but on balance, seeing one of the greatest bands of the 20th century lack any inspiration certainly made for a very compelling reason for the Doctor to save the day. But what did you guys think of the episode? Is there something you liked? Is there something you didn't like? Is there something we missed? Did we gloss over it? Let us know in the comments section on your favourite podcast streaming app, or head over to our Instagram and TikTok pages at Tardisian Files Podcasts and let us know in the comments for the promotional content for this episode. Hope you enjoyed listening to this episode, everyone, and as always, see you next time on Tardisian Files.